awesome people. So I love being with awesome people, and I guess that's why I'm I'm still part of this amazing community because we're all passionate learners. Um, I really have a nerdy background as an electronics engineer, and a long corporate career, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been creating 6 tech startups, a couple in fintech in China in the early days of the fintech wave there. And I've worked with virtual coaching in India in also a very exciting landscape. Lots of opportunities. I've done other things in edtech and life science and other stuff. Today I'm very passionate about disrupting the education system. That's one of my main learning objectives, and finding ways to create a new paradigm there. I've been part of this amazing ecosystem since late 2015, when the plans of running the first ExO Sprint started to take form and shape, and I was already building kind of ExO-like organizations at the time. I got invited to join the first Sprint team as a coach on an Edge team. And the rest is history. So we'll get back to some of those war stories, I guess, during the session. So I'm very excited to be here with all of you and continue to learn how we really can transform the world to make it a better place. So thank you for having me.
Awesome, great. Thank you very much, Lars. So we'll get to that very, very shortly. So let me just share my screen here, and as you know, I'll just go through this very quickly. We've covered this yesterday. These are the 4 key objectives that I want to make sure that you walk away with. So knowing the sprint process, having experienced it as the innovation experience, knowing how to coach on a sprint, and knowing how to market and sell sprint. So I've been structuring all of the sessions we have together around those 4 objectives. And we are now in week 1. We are actually now in the yellow blob here, which is called the ExO Sprint. So that's the second meeting. And we have another session on Thursday, which is about sprint coaching specifically. Now, you also have an assignment that you've been working with, and these are the different roles. So there is a head coach, myself. There's going to be somebody called mentor coach, which will be there. It's going to be joining us next week to give some of her experience from sprints on a more ongoing basis, and also give you feedback on your initiatives. Each one of you will be a coach for 1 week. So you'll be a participant for 4 weeks, but a coach for 1 week. And then we'll have some disruptors at the end dialing in to disrupt and give you feedback on your ideas. So there are different roles. These are the criteria. I have covered these yesterday, so I won't go into it. But I wanted to actually spend more time. I think I'll go through those as well. But I wanted to spend time specifically on the role of rotating coach, because I didn't manage to go through that yesterday. So the participants we've covered, but for the rotating coach, essentially these are some of the expectations. And I will be actually briefing the first round of coaches this Friday, for the next week. So whoever you are a coach for next week, I will be briefing you on Friday. By the way, we have shared with you yesterday the dashboard that has like your coaching week, in which week you're rotating coach. Please have a look at it. And if the week doesn't work for you, let us know. I'll try to swap things around. Tomorrow we want to have it final, but today you can still move around if that week just doesn't suit you. Maybe you have something planned, or maybe you're on holiday or something like that. So if there are any changes that you need to make, let us know. Otherwise, from tomorrow onwards, your weeks of rotating coaches will be fixed. So essentially, the idea of the rotating coach is practice being a sprint coach. If it's a sprint coach certification, the best way is to practice and to get some feedback with my preparation and my guidance. So I'll be briefing you and I'll be supporting you throughout the whole week, but essentially you are in charge of the team. Just like if you were on a real sprint, you'll be in charge of a team for a week. And the idea is that on Monday, you do a planning call. You then facilitate and organize meetings during the week. On Thursday, you do a dry run of the presentation. And on Friday, you facilitate the presentation of the results itself. So that's kind of will be your role as a coach. And there are some other expectations here. So ensure that the people know what they are working on, that the team is going towards a destination, that they are organized. They will have enough work with the content itself. So any organization and logistics you can take out of their way, it's helpful, because mostly they will kind of have a lot of stuff to do just with the content itself. support the team, attend key meetings. You don't have to be on all the meetings, but it would be better if you were. Provide inspiration, ensure the final presentation is success, and also facilitate actually that Friday call. And then on Friday, you'll be giving feedback to them. So one of the key roles of ExO Sprint coach is to give feedback at the end of every week. So that's what you will be practicing also there. So these are some basic expectations. And then essentially here is a weekly flow. I think by now you all have these slides, so you can just revise that. There is a weekly flow for a participant and a weekly flow for a rotating coach. But actually for the rotating coach that is incoming, it always starts on Friday the week before, where you attend a handover call with your previous coach. And then essentially you need to be the one that knows the assignments, knows what's being worked on, schedule, coordinate with the team the first call, the planning call on Monday, where you plan the whole week, and then essentially run the whole week as we have discussed. And I'll cover that more with you in detail on Friday with the first group. For logistics, I think all of you hopefully are fine. And Christine, we've been working on the problem with the card, but hopefully it's getting better. If not, please let us know. But I know that the team was working on it. I can, however, share with you a direct link to access the platform. We've had some platform access issues. Otherwise, all of you should be on the project, should have calendar invites. We'll be sending the invites for rotating coaches briefings tomorrow. Once we have everything final, and then the dashboard link is here. This is where you can find all the information, emails of each other, and all the key information for the course. And actually, I can put this, Christine, in a chat for you. But this is basically the direct link to the project.
All right. Yeah, because I just went on, and it's not on my board. You've got it's just not there. So yeah, I need that direct link. And I haven't seen the schedule for the coaching. I had a look at the dashboard, but I must have missed it. So,
it's on the, it should be on the Team 1 tab. And then at the bottom, it says like when you're coaching. Actually, I can even show you here. So essentially it's here, and you would be in week 2 as of now. So as I said, if any of you need to swap around, let me know. But for now, you're assigned to week 2, which is the week after, not the next week, but the week after.
Okay, right.
And then this is your direct link to the project, the first one here.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Perfect. So that is all of the different logistics. And just by the way, if you need to contact any of us, I mean, I'm sure you have my email, but you have my email, you have Dea's email here. Anastasia has been helping us with all the scheduling and program management, finances, for any payment issues, Kevin for the community. And then if anything is not working well, and some of you have been using it, there is the little green blob, intercom, or support@openexo.com. Great. So this is what I wanted to kind of cover, just to tie up a few loose ends from yesterday. Now, if I may ask you on the call, how many of you know very well business model canvas? If you can raise your hand somehow on video, how many of you know it fairly well? Most of you. Is there anybody that doesn't know business model canvas on the call? Speak now or remain silent. No, all of you know. Okay, so let me skip this part, then we'll save some time. I just wanted to do a brief kind of overview on that, because one of your tasks for this week is to come up with a business model canvas for Coke. So I won't go into that. So let's dive in then to the main topic of today, which is the ExO Sprint. So this is what we've covered yesterday. We've covered that the world is changing, traditional organizations struggle for multiple reasons, not only because they create entropy, which Christine is working on, but also because they just don't adapt fast enough to the changing conditions. So exponential organizations is one concept that we are working with, and many companies want to evolve into an exponential organization, but they have the immune system, and for that we have created the ExO Sprint to help to bypass this immune system problem and actually help to accelerate and move an organization through the initial phases of that transition towards being an exponential organization. So this is kind of mostly an overview of yesterday, and today we're going to dive in straight into the process itself, into the ExO Sprint. But before I do that, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on a concept that I have hinted on several times yesterday as well. And is the concept of kind of being able to focus on two sides of innovation, or two kinds of innovations at the same time. And if you remember yesterday, we had the example of Kodak, and then Fuji, and then Instagram, right? So we had this kind of three things. And this kind of trichotomy of focuses is actually very key for today's business leaders. And there's been multiple researches done that kind of show that organizations that are able to succeed over time and change and evolve have leaders that are able to grasp those three things at the same time, otherwise called ambidexterity, which is essentially focusing on their current business, at the same time evolving that current business, and at the same time creating new businesses on the edge that can, that can eventually become the main business, right? So they need to be able to do these three things at the same time. And for this, I won't speak about the first, because that's something that is like running organization as it is, although there is, of course, opportunities for continuous improvement. But I want to speak about those two other things. So the second and the third, which is essentially evolving the core business and then creating disruptive business models and businesses on the edge. So innovation can be defined as improving what already exists, right? So that's evolving the current business model. And disruption can be defined as creating something new, which makes the old obsolete. If we take this definition, essentially when companies go through an ExO Sprint, they are able to do two things at once. They are able to do the yellow part, so they are able to evolve their core business. And you can see here that from kind of a square representing the core business, which is a little bit closed off, a little bit unflexible, a little bit rigid, they go to a circle, which is a bit more open. So they evolve their current business, but they keep the same business model. So they are not changing the business model. So if you are a car company, you still are selling through dealers. You're not doing the Tesla thing. If you are an airline, you're still kind of flying routes, and like everything is pretty much the same, but you do it better using attributes and using other things. So this is something that you'll be working on as part of your simulation, which is the ExO core. And you're leveraging existing assets, and you are having the same business model. And then you do more disruptive things on the edge, which is launching new ExOs, where you have new business models and you have no legacy constraints. And actually, the whole interaction between the core business and the edge businesses, that's kind of a chapter on its own. And there is kind of lots to get wrong, and also huge opportunities if you get that right. But we can deal with that separately on another topic. So if I would give you an example, if you were a Marriott and going through the ExO Sprint, essentially you would do two things. You would become a digital Marriott, so kind of evolve your business in alignment with the current trends. So that would be the innovation part. But you would also launch ExOs, which could look something like that, TripAdvisor, Booking.com, and Airbnb, all are in a similar space, but all very disruptive business models. So that's just to give you kind of an example of the kind of transformation we are looking at when companies go through a sprint, which is to help them evolve their current business, but not to change it radically, and at the same time create new business models on the edge. And eventually, if kind of the thesis holds and the markets get disrupted, the ExO itself can actually grow into something much bigger than the mothership organization, and eventually a lot of the assets and resources can even migrate inside or into the ExO directly. So this is kind of a key concept here, and let's now dive into kind of what I want to go by itself. Now, this is a document that I have shared with all of you. It is on the platform, and you can download it. It's kind of a nice summary of all the key concepts that are relevant to an ExO Sprint. It's actually a kind of another way to summarize the book. That is one type of summaries on our website, but this is another one that has, I think, a very powerful summary of all the key concepts. And I will be going through this kind of page by page today. And as I said, use it as an overview of a sprint, but also use it as a prompt for Lars to share his different stories. So essentially, up front, you will find things we've already covered yesterday. So I'll just kind of skip through that, but you find the fourth industrial revolution, you find the different way that affects businesses today, which we discussed yesterday. you find kind of a characteristic of the exponential organizations, and looking at the biggest problem, which is the immune system, and then looking at what actually companies need to be able to transform and make the changes happen, and basically a brief overview of the ExO model. This is actually a great kind of set of slides that you can even use towards a potential client when you're presenting some of these things. And obviously this is all summarized in the ExO Canvas, which has been the subject of the first course. We have, many of you have done, or all of you have done the ExO Consultant course. And this is how the canvas looks like. So if we specifically look into the ExO Sprint, these are some of the reasons. We've covered these yesterday as well, but here are some of the reasons of why companies find it difficult to implement a process like that or any transformation process by themselves. And here are some ways that ExO Sprint addresses. So these are almost like the problems, and these are some of the solutions that the ExO Sprint is bringing. And again, I went over these in detail yesterday. So overall, basically, this is how the process looks like overall. If you look at the 10 weeks itself, there is some preparation phase, there is the sprint itself, and then there is some follow-up phase. And you can see here, just like we now discussed, that it happens in two flavors, two streams. Yellow is the edge stream, and blue is the core stream, or I think it's maybe turquoise or teal or something like that. So before we look at the different elements, I also just wanted to mention that there are different roles on sprints that you can encounter. So actually running a sprint is not just done by one person, but the sprint has different roles. So from kind of leading a sprint, you'd usually, inside a client organization, you'd usually have a sprint sponsor who's usually somebody very senior in the business. They're not involved on a daily basis with the sprint, but they are the ultimate client. They are the one that signed the check. They are the one that commissioned the work. Usually it's a CEO, or maybe it could be an innovation officer, or it could be a managing director of a division of a business. You know, we've had all these kind of different cases, but it's somebody that is essentially sponsoring the work. And then they nominate somebody a bit more junior that works with us more directly. It's kind of like a project manager that manages this from the client side. And there can, of course, be people who observe, who are part of it somehow, but they are not actually formal parts of the team. Then you have team members who are actually participating in the sprints. You have team members on the edge teams, and you have team members on the core teams. And then you have us as ExO practitioners coming in. And usually you would have a combination of head coaches and coaches, although this a little bit depends and a little bit flexible. Sometimes you could have a coach playing a role of a head coach as well. But in the ideal case, and if also budget allows, you would have a head coach that kind of is the main one-person contact with the client. And then you have a coach for every team that goes through it. So the sprint can be 2 teams or 4 teams. Those are the most usual numbers. Then you have external advisors. Every sprint team have access to advisory tickets through the marketplace. So however you agree this with the client, but it's between 5 to 10 advisory calls per team during the sprint. You might have some speakers and trainers, especially in the kickoff session that we'll speak about in a second. And then you'd have disruptors in the middle, actually disrupting the ideas. And so those are all of the kind of different roles. And actually, you have already experienced advisors on the consultant course. In terms of speakers and trainers, that's not something we'll simulate, but everything else will be simulated as part of the simulation. So I will be the head coach, and then you will be coaches for 1 week, and we will have real live disruptors on Friday. So before we move on to kind of next pieces, actually, let me just have one more slide and then hand over to Lars. So this is actually what happens with a client before actually you kick off the sprint. So it's not like you sign a sprint, you can begin right away. Usually we recommend 6 to 8 weeks, actually a preparation time before the sprint kicks off. So from the moment the company signs the contract and says we want to do a sprint, we usually recommend a preparation phase of kind of 6 to 8 weeks to allow to prepare everything. And there are kind of 3 main topics that are important to do here. Number 1 is logistical, and it's basically just to get all the dates in the calendar. When is going to be the kickoff session? When is going to be the disruption session? When is going to be the closing session? You know, are you hitting any holidays in the middle? Do you need to take a pause for a week? Like basically aligning where is actually those 10 weeks and how they're going to happen. Is actually 11 weeks because you have the kickoff week also up front. So that's kind of one piece that you need to do. Number two is to define scope for the sprint, and that's usually good to speak with the sponsor directly and to kind of, so like, is it kind of everything is up for grabs, or is it limited? Where would you like the teams to innovate? What would you like to achieve? What would you like to bring? And it's basically the contracting with the sponsor itself. Some of this might have happened already in the contracting phase. And the last big piece is choosing the participants for the sprint. Usually we support clients to choose the participants for the sprint. One of the best ways we have seen is when actually clients open up applications and they have people apply, and then we basically help them to pick up people. In short, for the core teams, you want probably a bit more senior people because they'll be changing the current business. So it's good when they have some organizational capital and they can kind of change things. They can get important meetings on the calendar. And for the edge teams, you usually want more kind of more disruptive people who are kind of maybe more sometimes younger, but sometimes also just the way they think is kind of more disruptive, so they can actually think about how the core business can be disrupted. So I'll pause here before we start diving into the elements themselves. And essentially, Lars, if you can maybe just like name the name of clients of sprints that you have worked in, just so we can kind of get, our people can get the kind of sense of scope, but also what kind of questions they can ask you. And then if you have any insights to share about the preparation phase. So before we actually even start the sprint itself, any insider stories and recommendations from your experience. Over to you, Lars.
Thank you, Jaroslav. You're opening Pandora's box here, right? There's quite a lot to talk about. So, and by the way, that reminds me to encourage you all again to ask questions. I'd love to do this based on your questions and your curiosity. And until I get questions, I'll just be talking, right? So let that be a warning. So just okay. So obviously, you know the cases from the exponential transformation book. So there are obvious ones that are out there, more or less well described, but you know the game they're in. We have been working with companies like Interprojection, an insurance broker, HP, large format printers, Diva utility in Dubai. We've been working with online stockbroker platforms. We've been working with bedsheet manufacturers in Brazil. We've been working in higher education with business schools. We've been working with real estate. The Bad Bank of Spain, Sareb, was an interesting case as well. Yeah, so there we have been in, I think, probably 12 or 15 different industries. So I wouldn't put any limitations on what kind of questions you could ask. Hit us. Just one thing I want to share is I see so many new challenges and opportunities and new variants of pretty much everything every time we run a sprint. So I think that's why transformation is so exciting to work with. We still haven't seen everything. There's so much more to be seen and done. But I'm obviously keen to give examples of what has worked and what has not worked and what I would have done differently. And the preparation phase, let me dive into that right away. This is by far the most important phase in a sprint. A sprint is very front-loaded in terms of the work effort that is taken. So if you are the one preparing everything around the sprint, you're going to find yourself to be very busy in that preparation period that Jaroslav just talked about. It's not just about coordinating dates for workshops and ordering books. There's so much more. There's the whole alignment with the client around what's going to be the outcome of the sprint. What's the desired outcome? And again, here every client have different desires, and But in general, most clients are doing this for the first time and they have no idea what they can get out of the sprint. They do it for different reasons, but they don't know what they can get out of the sprint when you are trying to align with them. So this is a big challenge, actually. And this is where they're looking for your guidance, your input to what could be the outcome. And I've worked with very large clients where I was kind of drafting 4 main outcomes that I would suggest, and they accepted it right away because they had nothing better. And when that's the case, it's probably a good position to be in, because now you can kind of massage the client and they will listen to you, and you can start the flow of the sprint, and hopefully that will take you in transformative directions. But be aware that at some point you're going to run into a wall, or it's probably a brick wall. There are a lot of things that cannot be changed, that cannot be touched, and there are strategic agendas, obviously, in every organization. So actually the desired outcome becomes very clear during the sprint, and sometimes sooner, sometimes later, but you need to be the one spotting what those outcomes should be. And sometimes the client is suddenly telling you they hadn't thought about it, but suddenly they know that we have to involve leadership development training in this as part of the driver for the sprint, or we have to address the disruption that's challenging our business model, or whatever it is. These are 2 very common objectives in sprints, by the way. I just wanted also to give a couple of specific pieces of recommendation here. When you're preparing for a sprint, always suggest to involve the human resources department from the client side. And they're often involved in these conversations from the beginning, but just as often they are not, because they are not really prioritized very highly in many organizations. They are not around the table with the senior decision makers, but they play an important role during a sprint, where you also get to talk about future career paths that you could create in your organization for entrepreneurs who are going through a sprint, who are creating exciting initiatives, but there's no way they're going to be able to implement them unless there is a career path where you can do that, where you could work on a new startup or play some ExO or innovation role in your organization. So HR actually is very important to bring on board in the sprint from the beginning, almost regardless of what the theme of the sprint is. So you should suggest that. That's just my recommendation. We have sometimes had them joining too late in the process. They said, hey, we need to assess the performance of the participants. And I was like, so why are you coming 10 weeks into the sprint and saying that? So always propose to bring in human resources from the very beginning, and during the preparation phase is the best point.
Lars, I have a question.
Yes.
One of the challenge that I see in Malaysia, I think in many other countries as well, there's a lot of competitors. For example, people coming from design thinking, Google, Sprint, and then we have traditional consultants from EY, PwC. In your experience, why do people choose ExO transformation versus the other techniques or consulting approach which is out there?
Yeah, it's a good question. And by the way, when somebody says that these are competing methodologies, it's because they don't understand pretty much any of the methodologies typically, or at least they still don't know the ExO methodology. What's the difference really? And we use big time design thinking during sprints, sometimes more, sometimes less. Sometimes we let the teams work in their preferred ways when they ideate and experiment, and sometimes we facilitate to because we think we can accelerate their performance and the outcome by doing that. But most of the time, we see there really interesting, really good design thinking teams or even departments in large organizations, and they do exciting things. But in many cases, it doesn't really lead to implementation. So you only take this to the end of the ideation phase. You do a hackathon, you do some facilitate sessions and do very, very useful things. But when it comes to implementing the new solutions, the new initiatives, nothing happens. And the ExO methodology has the power of actually involving the top leadership all the way through the process. They are making decisions to support or maybe improve initiatives during the process. So when they hear the final pitch, they understand the methodology, they understand what the teams have been going through and why this is important and why we have to implement something. Because if we say no to everything, we might as well just focus on the core business and never try to innovate. And this will lead to our death as a corporation. So you got to understand, if you're in design thinking, that this needs to be implemented, right? Don't just hand it over to somebody who maybe is supposed to do that and then nothing happens. You can also involve agile consultants and coaches and other people who bring in other aspects. Agile is really good once you're at the early stages of a new startup, for example, in-house or externally. You need to quickly get a minimum viable product to market. You need to keep iterating on that, build, measure, learn. Then you need these agile skill sets and processes. And ExO allows you to actually focus both and maintain a focus both on the core and on the disruptive innovation at the same time. Find that balance of working and involving the leadership that must make the implementation decisions. So got to see the bigger picture there.
I would just maybe, if I can just add 2 more points to what Lars said, Azim. Two more other differences that I've kind of been communicating and seeing. One of them is that I think, of course, you can use design thinking for all kinds of different ways, but I think primarily it's been designed or it's been invented to invent new products and services, right? So you usually start with the customer and customer need, and you design products and services that can satisfy those customer needs. While at the same time, it's maybe not so good, at least kind of initially, it's not so good in designing new business models, and it's not so good in thinking, what is the future of the industry? Where would the industry be like in 5 to 10 years, and how do we design that? It's mostly just looks at what customers want today, unpacks those needs, goes deeper than that, and then designs new products and services. But it's not very good at designing new innovative business models. That's maybe what more lean is about. But it's also not very good in taking into account the whole context that we live in, right? And how things are changing. So yesterday we were mentioning that Elon Musk's builds things to intersect with where the exponential technologies will be 5 to 10 years from now, right? So if you just do design thinking, you might design something that works now, but it might not work in 2 or 3 years when somebody disrupts you, right? So this is kind of one kind of a big difference. I think in relation to, for example, with consultancies, I think the appeal of this model is that it's a time-limited process. It takes 10 weeks, right? It's not, many consulting engagements around transformation, they take long time, 6 months, 12 months. Many of them are kind of quite long, ongoing engagements. And also many of them are actually quite costly. I think actually if you look at the price of the sprint and compare it to some of those consulting engagements, especially with some of the bigger players, I think the value you get out of the sprint is exceptionally high, and you kind of get it very, very quickly. And the other comparison is that because we have a coaching approach, we are actually building capability at the same time as we are designing the future of the organization. So consultants often come in and they kind of tell you what to do, right? They make an analysis and they tell you what to do, which is sometimes what companies want and need, and that's fine. But if they also want to build their internal capability to do this on their own kind of afterwards, then I think we have our approach has an edge there. The other powerful thing also is the whole kind of dual approach. There's actually only one other company that I know of that kind of explicitly works with it, although McKinsey also has the 3 horizons, which, you know, I'm sure they are working with. But there's a company in Singapore called Innosight, which is Clayton Christensen's company, and they have exactly the same approach. They call it dual transformation. But I think they are more of a consultancy, so they kind of come in and they build it for you. Whereas I think we are coming in and we are leaving behind the framework, the capacity, and the methodology. So those are maybe just few examples. Just by the way, on weeks, like after we finish in week 6, we're going to have one more extra session week 7, and it's going to be all about how you sell this, how you bring it to the market, how you deal with objections, all that kind of stuff. So all these questions, happy to address them also in that session after you've experienced yourself the methodology.
Okay, good. Thank you. Very useful.
Great. Lars, if I may ask before we move to the next phase, if you were to say like 1 or 2 good tips for choosing participants, and maybe 1 or 2 good tips for like defining a scope, or maybe tips and some examples of how it was done in the previous sprints.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree very much with your slide here. That is half the battle, really, picking the right people. My tip is to first of all, open up for anybody in the organization potentially to participate in the sprint. I think one of my most exciting cases was Cotamines in Brazil. They actually announced the sprint way in advance, opened up on their website. It was an internal website. They launched a campaign allowing everybody to apply to participate in the sprint, regardless of your role, regardless of your background, anybody could apply. And they needed 24, 25 participants, and they had over 250 applicants, right? So they were kind of oversigned by a factor 10 from the beginning. They need to pick people, but essentially the fact that you communicate openly before the sprint to the whole organization that we are doing this, it is a fantastic positive approach, in my opinion. Everybody feels that they have equal opportunity, and they do. Obviously, not everybody gets selected, but everybody have the opportunity. And then in terms of selection, you want to check that people really want to participate. And since if you do it as an open application process, you're just getting application from people who really want to do this. They may or may not understand what it involves at that point, but they do want to do this. And we have seen a lot of examples that work quite the opposite way. We had organizations that didn't want to tell anybody in the organization about the sprint because they were afraid of the immune system response from everybody. That now we are launching a transformation sprint. What does that mean? And we are freaking people out, so we are not telling anybody about it. And they went out to cherry pick people, and some wanted to participate and some didn't want, right? But usually they overcome their fear of joining, and they actually get excited about the journey once they get on board.
Great.
But we have had a couple of people once in a while in different sprints that simply didn't want to be in the sprint. They hated it. They hadn't selected it. And that is not a good situation to be in with a team that's already fighting all the barriers in the organization. So that would be a couple of recommendations for choosing participants.
It's actually also a kind of a topic that sometimes there is a bit of politics involved on who's on such projects and who's not, and how it all works, and also how it works into teams. But maybe we can speak about it on Thursday once we speak about coaching teams specifically through Sprint, because there are some things here. In terms of scope, Lars, I mean, is it usually kind of invent new products, or what kind of maybe 2-3 examples of scope definitions you have seen in the past, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
Yeah, we had an interesting sprint. Another one was also in Brazil with Visa. Actually, at first they just wanted half of the sprint, the first half, because all they needed was a catalog of innovative ideas that they could submit for funding at the LATAM headquarter level, the regional level. And we did that. And essentially they got so excited about the first half of the sprint, so they bought the second half of the sprint as well, but that's another story. But one outcome absolutely is that they need the initiatives. Here's one thing to add, because when you prepare for the sprint and you have conversations with the sponsor of the sprint, they may at that point tell you, we're totally on board your agenda, that this is about acquiring new mindset, new skill sets. It's about transforming the mindset of the people and these things, and not so much about the specific initiative. But I can tell you, when you get to the finish line 10 weeks later, they are looking for implementation plans, and they say, when can we start implementing this? And at that point, you regret that you didn't put some implementers into some of the sprint teams. And usually there are some in the teams hidden, but you didn't pick them for being implementers. They just happen to be good at execution and implementation. No. But I've been in sprints as well where we couldn't find a single implementer in any of the teams, and the CEO changed his mind and he wanted implementation, and that was what mattered. But in the beginning, it was a sprint just to learn the methodology. So that's an example where the agenda shifted, the desired outcome changed, and and that gives you some challenges. Yeah. Now you need to build new implementation teams with the original fathers and mothers of the ideas, and that's a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. Great, Lars. And we've actually, I mean, we've had everything from companies being really committed to the ideas themselves and actually investing in them and implementing them afterwards, and kind of moving forward all the way to, you know, I just want to like have my people think differently. But I would say that it's kind of a minority. Usually companies buy sprints because they really want to, I mean, they do want their people to think differently, but they also want to create business ideas and initiatives they can then go and implement. It's actually one of the big appeals of the sprint. So this is a little bit about what happens up front, and obviously there is much more to say, but we'll just move on. So once this has been all defined, imagine, you know, this has been created, the teams are selected, schedules are scheduled, scope is defined. Then essentially the next phase, what happens is that you go into basically the beginning part, and that has two subsections. One of them is called Awake, and the other one is called Align. And they all happen, and they both happen kind of in a presential setting. Usually this is like right before week 1. So this is like right before week 1, but sometimes we've had examples where this happened like a month or 2 before the sprint itself, you know, for various kind of logistic reasons. And what you want to do in the Awake part is that essentially the purpose of it is to kind of awake people to how the world is changing and what is actually happening in the world. So, you know, this is actually one of the big differences maybe from some of the other methodologies, that is actually kind of upfront we come and we say, look, you live in a world that is changing, and the world will not be the same 5 years from now that it is today, and the business world will not be the same. And you need to understand this world, because if you don't, you'll be left behind, right? And it's kind of the message of the Awake session. And initially it started being run by Salim, but now we have many speakers that can run. Usually it's a format of a keynote, so kind of a 1 hour to 2 hour keynote that just walks across all different kinds of disruptions happening in technology, in business, in the world, and kind of really shakes up people. This is actually, you know, a super important session, because for most people in organizations, you know, unless they are like very ambitious by themselves, most people kind of, you know, regardless of what people say, they don't actually like to change that much. Like, we like to do things the same way tomorrow, like we've done them today, right? I mean, to really change things radically, it's quite difficult for the human psyche. And in most cases, the cost of changing actually seems higher than cost of not changing, right? Like I already have what I have. So if I need to change, it feels like it's costing me something. But if you do this session right, you actually, in a space of an hour or two, you can switch this equation completely. And you can have people realize that cost of not changing is actually higher than cost of changing, considering what's happening in the world and considering that's what's going to hit their business, right? Or what's already hitting their industry. And this is the kind of inflection point that is one of the key that actually helps us to deal with the immune system, right? Because the immune system is also pushing back on the change. But if you realize that the world is changing and there is no place for your current business in kind of 5-10 years from now in the future, and your industry will look different, you suddenly realize that you have to change. And it's like you have to change yes or yes. There is no other option. And the idea for the Awake session is that you host it for as many people as possible. So you can see here the picture of an auditorium, but you can invite 200, 500 people to see it. You can have it online broadcasted. The idea of it is this impacts the whole organization, and the whole organization, as much of it as possible, kind of awakens to the concept of the world is changing and we have to change also. It's one of the key elements actually right at the beginning of the sprint that kind of fuels both inspiration, but also the kind of urgency of what needs to happen throughout the sprint. So this happens up front, and then you'd have the align, which is usually a set of exercises and activities over a course of a day and a half or two. And essentially the goal of it is to give people all the theoretical foundations to be able to actually participate on a sprint. Now, it doesn't mean you can cover everything in 2 days, but you want to give them enough understanding of, what are the ExO attributes, what is the difference between core and what is the difference between, what is the difference between core and edge. Some of the align videos are actually in the platform. So you have there a section about business model canvas and how it's structured. You have a section about every attribute and how it is structured. You have a section about ExO Sprint and what is actually the process. You have a section about customer discovery process, right? From Lean, and kind of how do you actually, kind of the customer discovery, customer validation, customer creation, and company creation, the 4 phases of customer development process as described by Steve Blank. So all these kind of theoretical foundations, that is a little bit about Lean, like build, measure, learn, cycle, and all that kind of stuff. So you want to give to the participants of the sprint. So this is not for everybody. This is usually just for the sprint teams. And ideally, if budget allows, you also have the coaches sitting there. And you want to give them exercise and activities to like really understand all of the key methodologies, everything they will encounter. So later on, when you are in week 3 and you want them to go and have interviews with people, you can come back to it and say, we've studied these 4 phases of customer development process. Today or this week, we're going to do customer discovery. So this is how it works, right? So you want to actually train them on some of the key approaches that we are using in the sprint during the align session. And also, it finishes with actually planning the sprint, planning like how we're going to communicate, how we're going to work, who is kind of on the team, people, team building, getting to know each other. So this whole kickoff is super important, both to awaken the people and like the whole organization, and then give people a concrete enough set of information that they can actually start working with the frameworks throughout the sprint itself. So I'll again pause here, and Lars, maybe 2-3 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 stories from Awake and Align, what's happened and how it happened in different contexts.
Absolutely. First of all, the Awake workshop is always an amazing experience when you interview the audience afterwards. We usually see 200 to 300 people in the room, so it requires quite a large auditorium because our clients usually invite their partners as well, and a larger group from their own organization to experience this kind of milestone moment it is to have the awakening. And it is an awakening, and it's absolutely required to actually have a transformative sprint. The awakening is super important. Even if you have a 1-hour client meeting, just outside of the scope of the sprint, just a short meeting, you should start with a short awakening. Otherwise, we are in operational mode, which we are all firefighting and doing our daily operations. But the thing about disruption and all of that is not top of mind for most people. So the awakening is super important. And it's a great experience when we look at all feedback we receive from these awakes. When it comes to the Align workshop, yes, it's a great chance to learn the methodology, learn about the sprint process before we actually start doing it. And this is primarily for the sprint participants. So we play together. It can be one full day, it can be a day and a half, sometimes 2 full days. But what I want to focus on is the very hands-on learning that's going on. One of the things people fear the most is actually to get out there on the streets and interview people that you don't know. And this is what we ask them to do when we ask them to define their key hypothesis behind a new idea they're creating. Then you need to test this hypothesis, right? And during the sprint, this is a very important activity. There are people who are cheating. It's like cheating in the parachute packing class. It's not a good idea. You got to do it. You got to test your hypothesis. And interviewing people you don't know is for many, way out of the comfort zone. So we are having some fun when we are doing this. It's not just the instructor who's having the fun. After doing it, actually people have a good laugh. This creates memorable moments that we talk about later in the sprint when people are saying, I've interviewed 3 people about my key hypothesis for something that can transform our company. And interviewing 3 people is probably not enough. You probably need a bigger sample size. And we need to talk about what happened when we were interviewing people on the street during the Align workshop. We had a good laugh. We didn't feel comfortable, but it's so important to do it. So it's just to say people are learning by doing that, getting out of the comfort zone, but we are having a laugh at the same time. We're learning and we're bonding, and we are actually preparing ourselves in an ultra short period of time for what we need to be able to do, the skill sets and the tools we need to have ready for the full sprint. So it's also a very engaging and enriching experience to do this.
Great, thank you, Lars. Any quick questions about the Awake Align at the beginning?
I have a question.
Yeah, Darcy.
So when you just do that within the big group when you validate your hypothesis? Like you said, you have an auditorium, you have a couple hundred people, or do you actually get them for the evening exercise before they come back the next day, that they go torment some family members or some friends or to get that?
I may have mixed too much the Awake and the Align workshop. Yeah, they're 2 different workshops. They usually, first we have the Awake workshop, which is in an auditorium, 200-300 people. Is mostly one-way communication with the Q&A because it's a lot of people. So you're not doing the Align workshop with 200-300 people.
Okay.
The day after, typically, we do the Align workshop just with the sprint participants.
So that's around 20-25 people. So they actually go through the exercises. It's not the 200-300. It's more like the smaller group.
But we do have exercises that work very well for 200-300 people in an auditorium. We
could do it technically, but usually it's the Awake is for a bigger group, and then it's quite a small group for the Align. Actually, it's about only the participants. Mm-hmm.
So then you're running the Align session with your 25 people or so, and you get them to fill out the business model canvas, validate some of the hypotheses. Do you like literally take them out of the room and they need to go speak to other people that they don't know, or do you have them do that with just different people in the room?
You have to get out of the building to test the hypothesis that you just told us about. Yes, otherwise this doesn't work, because then it's like building a business plan, something you do in a meeting room with your colleagues. It doesn't get out of the building. This is why it fails. So we have to, people have to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it's a safe playground workshop where you can try it out and you have a good, positive experience from doing it.
Sorry?
You sent me an email saying,
Oh, right, okay.
I never got an email.
Okay, I mean, if you go create.
I have one question.
Nick here. Yeah.
Yeah, so we are assuming that the company already has like internal initiatives, core or edge. But what happens if once the sprint is starting and teams are set up with different people from the company, but they don't have as many initiatives as teams? Do they have like an ideation process before this alignment session, or
we don't assume. They actually, when they start a sprint, they don't need to have any initiatives. They start from scratch. They define initiatives actually in week 2. They start brainstorming them, and in week 3, they start to narrow them down. So it's actually, they create initiatives inside the sprint. What we do, what Lars is speaking about is, what we do sometimes, we have, we give them like Walmart or some kind of case study. And they work on the case study, right? So they are basically just practicing, but they are not working on real initiatives. That happens in the sprint. In the Align workshop, they are just working on a case study. Yeah.
Okay, that's clear enough. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's very important, it's a case study from a different industry, because otherwise we tend to go into solution mode right away.
Otherwise they'd like start designing the outcomes of the sprint in even before it starts, and it's probably not good. The goal of it is to just have them learn the methodology rather than to do the work itself of the sprint. Yeah, perfect.
I would just add that actually the question often comes up, what if we already have initiatives in our organization? Can we take them through the sprint, or can we not? And my answer typically in the beginning is, you're very welcome to feed some of your existing initiatives into the beginning of the sprint, but I'm just telling you that you're not going to recognize them when they come out at the other end. They're going to have some 10x magical sauce all over them, and they will be exponentially different.
Yeah. However, one thing that you would have to watch out for is that sometimes people want to use the sprint as a way to legitimize something they've been working on for 3 years and get funding for it, right? And it's not necessarily bad if it's a good idea, but what is bad about it is that they are actually not going through the sprint. They are like, at every discussion, they are just vouching for their own idea, right? And they are actually not creating anything new. They are just kind of pushing their idea the whole time, and that becomes a problem. So if they are able to bring it and say, this is what I've been working on, let's consider it, but let's actually go through the process, then it can work. If the only thing they ever do is always like fight for that idea, then that's you need to have a conversation with them about that, because then it kind of manipulates the whole team in one direction. And sometimes it also might happen that people don't like that direction, so it can actually kind of unravel the team. So that's definitely something to.
So that's to manage the ego, the entrepreneur ego.
Yeah, but it's also it's also like people are not necessarily being like super honest. They're just kind of coming into the process, but they are doing it because they want to push through that idea that they've already been working on, right? They just want to get it in front of the CEO, for example. It's a good way for them to do that. But those kind of things happen, and those need to be managed. As they
that's very important. It's actually, as a coach, it's a very important question to ask. Have you attempted this initiative before? Has this been worked on before in your organization? And understand failed initiatives, ideas that have failed probably over and over again, and now is being tried again because now there's a sprint and resources and these things.
Great. We have to move on. Parvis, quick question, but we have 20 minutes left. We have quite a lot to cover, so let's.
Okay, very short. Do you have any video recording of the Awake session, just to see how it might go?
Well, traditionally Salim has been running them, and there is plenty of videos of Salim on it. One is like it's like one of his earlier speeches in France. I can share it with you later, but it's very easy to find on YouTube. And usually Salim would do something like that. In terms of Align, what we have is we have like this kind of product called One Day Workshop, which is kind of a modified version of the Align, and we have those recorded somewhere. So that's something we can do. Otherwise, usually it's kind of quite private to the client. So we don't have kind of many public recordings, but we have some recordings of things that we can share. And for the Awake, there is plenty of them online, yeah, of Salim, for example, what he's covering. Great, awesome. All right, perfect. So the next, what's going to happen, so after this, they start with week 1, and I'll kind of cover it together because we can't go week by week. So I'll cover, there's basically 2 cycles. If any of you have watched the Align videos on the platform, you know that the customer development process has 4 phases, right? It has customer discovery, customer validation, customer creation, and then company building, right? Those 4 phases. So the sprint covers the first 2. It covers customer discovery, that's the first 5 weeks, and it covers customer validation, which is the second 5 weeks. In the customer discovery process, you're basically creating initial ideas and you're getting some initial validation from the market around them. And that's what you will be practicing here in the simulation. In the customer validation, you actually build minimum viable products, actually concrete kind of products, concrete or mock-ups of products. And then you're actually testing selling behaviors. Would people buy this? You know, is this a valid product? Would they want it? So actually in the first part, you're more learning about the customer. And in the weeks 6 to 10, you're actually building solutions and you're actually selling them and kind of validating them through real conversations. Would people pay? You know, would they want to build this? Would they want to do this? And et cetera, right? So this is kind of how the sprint is structured. So in the first cycle, and you have these 2 cycles, they are similar, but they are different because in the first cycle, it's more about the ideas, but also about finding much more about the customer. And actually, even that's how, you know, in week 3, you will see that the interviews are structured in a way that upfront, you're just finding about the problems. You're not even testing whether they like your solution or not. You're just actually learning about what problems they have. And only at the end of those conversations, you actually test your solutions. So that's kind of the first 5 weeks. Then it is disruption, where you kind of disrupt the ideas. And then you go to validation when you're actually building concrete prototypes or minimum viable prototypes of those ideas. And you're testing them again with a set of customers, but that's much more not like what you think, but actually having them kind of use it, experience it, work with it, would they buy it, and all that kind of stuff, right? Like kind of it gets much more real. Inside those kind of, so you have these 2 cycles. Inside those weeks 1 to 5, you have kind of divergence. So in kind of week 1, 2, and 3, you're diverging, and then you're converging, and you finish, you know, with something concrete. And then again, you diverge in week 6 and 7, and then you converge towards week 10. At the end, you want every team to have around 2 initiatives, right? But in week 2, you will start with hundreds of initiatives. It's going to be like a lot of different things. That's the divergence. And then you present 5 at a disruption workshop. Then you again diverge a little bit, and then you conclude on 2 at the end, whether that's core or whether that's edge, right? So that's kind of where you want to get to. So as a whole sprint, if you have 4 teams, you're probably looking at 8 to 10 ideas. Although as Lars knows, sometimes you work a little bit differently, and you have 5 ideas from one team, and kind of it kind of works that way. But we're always trying to bring it to a very concrete small number, kind of up to 10 initiatives, or up to 10 initiatives. In terms of how that is structured, so that's kind of the overall overview. How this is structured, you know, I'll just go through the edge stream, but they are very similar. The only difference is that in the edge, you're actually designing new businesses, new EXOs, and in the core, you're evolving the current business, right? So for example, when you are designing a massive transformative purpose, in the core stream, what you are doing is you're designing a massive transformative purpose for the client organization, right? So if you're doing a sprint for HSBC, you're designing an MTP for HSBC or for part of it, right? In the edge stream, you actually have an MTP for every single one of these businesses, because each one of these businesses is a new separate business. But essentially, you know, I'll show both of them on the screen right now, so you can see just both of them. But they are very similar. Let me just scroll down here to the core. Okay, here you go. So the first week is called Explore, and essentially it's kind of a research and an exploration week, talking to people, doing primary, secondary research, finding about on the edge, you're finding about global challenges that are happening in the world. That's for the MTP, exponential technologies and startups. On the core, you're looking at, again, exponential technologies, new business models inside the core industry, right, that can disrupt it. Finding about the different changes in context for the organization, what are customers doing, what's happening around customers. Like for Coke, it would be the whole health movement and the challenges with sugar, right, in their products. So that's a context they need to take into account. And that's a context that next week you should consider when you're doing the core stream. And doing a business model canvas for the core organization, right? So that's actually what, what you're starting to work on this week. So this is week 1. In week 2, you actually, based on this information, you start to create ideas. In Edge, you're creating ideas for future new businesses, separate businesses. In Core, you're looking at internal initiatives that could help to address some of the disruptions that you find in week 1. In week 3, you go and you test these ideas, these seeds of ideas, you select them, you define some hypotheses behind them, and you go and test them with different audiences. So on the Edge, you would maybe test it with mostly customers, right? Clients. On the Core, you can have both internal and external initiatives. So you can be, again, testing with customers, but you can also be testing with internal customers. This week 3 is kind of quite a fun week. This is actually where you get out of the building, like Lars was saying, and you need to discover things. Then you get to week 4, where based on the learning, you actually select the winning 5 that you want to present on a disruption session, both on the Core and Edge. And in week 5, you present this at the disruption session, where you get some real feedback from a panel of disruptors. And usually we select, like one venture capitalist, one consultant, one experienced business executive, and maybe one entrepreneur or something like that. So it's a wide cross-section. Sometimes we bring in somebody with an expertise relevant to that business. So it's kind of a wide cross-section of community members that give feedback on those ideas. So Lars, we don't have space for many, but maybe just a couple of stories from the first cycle, right? So if you take it from week 1 all the way until the disruption workshop, so all the way until the very end of it, any kind of quick stories, maybe some experiences that you've had on your sprints?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the, let's just look at week 1 really quickly, because it's an exciting week. It's about researching, it's about looking at trends and technologies and startups. And for me, that is like the week in the playground, right? It must be so exciting to do that. But there's a measuring point here that tells you whether people are doing this because they think it's a school assignment they just have to finish, or because they really want to do this. And when people ask you on the Wednesday if they can start on next week's assignment because they have finished their research, then that tells me they're just working on a school assignment here. They're doing it because I'm asking them to do it. Because how can you possibly think you have uncovered a world of disruptive new technologies and business models that you have never seen in practice before, but somebody is doing it. So if you think you have finished your research already Wednesday, then I think you need to learn a lesson there. So and then you have a conversation. This is the coaching moment, the coaching opportunity, where you need to work with the team to help them understand why is it so important that we understand what's happening out there. And then they get back to work. Just a quick story. This is from this is from TD Ameritrade in the US, an online stockbroker platform. By the way, they were just acquired by Charles Schwab. Huge deal, very interesting. But I'm telling this very positive story. Not all stories are positive in our world, but this one is. So let me tell it before we're out of time. The sponsor was the head of platforms at TD Ameritrade. And when we started the research week, he said, I have on the other side of this wall, I have 40 of the top analysts, technology analysts in the industry on my payroll. And all they do every day is just study, research, analyze. What can we possibly learn from just 1 week of researching that we don't know already. And as I was kind of, very proud of the process, I said, wait and see, let's see on Friday what comes out of the research. Okay, he said, so you're telling me to trust the process? Yes, exactly. Okay, cool. And he was up for that. And on Friday at the result call, and some of these researchers were in the sprint teams, and they opened these result calls, all of them, saying, we just realized our focus in our research has been on the operations, on improving technologies, and doing due diligence on our new acquisitions, the companies that we are acquiring. We are not looking at disruption. We are not looking at new startups. So we have learned so much we didn't know in just a week. And the sponsor first turned pale, and then he smiled and said, I totally trust the process. Let's continue. So it's just to say that even when people are pushing back and say they know everything, that's the expert mindset that comes up, and we need a beginner's mindset to be successful at this. So this is another coaching opportunity.
That's a great example, Lars. And actually, the reality is that so much of disruption actually comes outside of your industry, and most companies actually are quite knowledgeable about their customers, their existing customers, but they are not so knowledgeable about their non-customers even. And they are quite knowledgeable about their competition, but they are not always kind of seeing, and Salim makes many different examples where, you can get disrupted completely from another industry. I was just watching CB Insights, one research company that I follow, and they were kind of saying that, for example, in healthcare, the game now is, will healthcare figure out technology before technology figure out healthcare, right? Because all technology companies have their eyes on healthcare. And the key is, so it's not enough for healthcare companies to be looking at other healthcare companies. They have to be looking at technology companies that are applying their technology expertise into healthcare. And I think it's becoming very, very interesting. So this is a little bit around this. Maybe just, the disruption workshop usually, we try to make it kind of nice and friendly, but usually it's quite a kind of a shock to the system, because until then the teams were working on their own, and they were working mostly by themselves. And usually we would involve senior leadership in the disruption workshop. And, they need to be properly prepared. And there is a whole other kind of thing to speak about there. But what sometimes happens is that people present in front of their CEO for the first time, for example, and they are super nervous. They need to be able to boil down. We give them quite a little time. It's like 5 minutes per idea. They're presenting 5 ideas. So usually it's around that. Sometimes we can be a little bit flexible, but usually it's quite short. I need to actually learn how to powerfully pitch and communicate their ideas to senior leadership and to the disruptors. And sometimes the feedback, they haven't had time to think. Obviously they have think through things and everything they present, but sometimes, they have forgotten things. So the goal of the feedback actually is to not only support what they are doing, but also challenge them to go farther in weeks 6 to 10, right? And we've had some disruption workshops where maybe they presented 5 ideas and the disruptors didn't like any of them, and neither the senior leadership. And, the team was kind of a little bit in pieces, right? Imagine you're working on something for 5 weeks. It's a high level, high stakes thing. You have your CEO there, you present the things, and just like the ideas are not good enough, you need to go farther. But actually, there was then the coach did some work with the team and kind of have picked up the pieces, and they actually were the team with the best ideas at the very end of the sprint. So they actually, even though they had to reimagine their ideas, they had to redraw a lot of things from scratch, they were so pushed by the experience that they actually worked double hard in the second cycle, and they came up with some amazing ideas at the very end. But a disruption workshop, it's quite like, it's a little bit like Dragon's Den, it's like you have, even though I don't watch Dragon's Den, but this is how I imagine, that's how it is. But you have kind of these ideas, you have a high stakes, high pressure environment, they are presenting the things, they're getting some challenging feedback. It's all kind of like, that's why it's called a disruption workshop. It's not called like an approval workshop, right? Or something like that. It's called disruption. And the goal of it is to disrupt the ideas to make them better. But it's also to teach the people that when you do innovation, it's not ever about a perfect idea. It's actually about the journey of having an idea, testing it, scratching it down, doing another one, testing it, scratching it down, actually continuously evolving and kind of changing things, not necessarily having the first idea from the beginning and then sticking with it throughout the end. So this is maybe just kind of an interesting note there. In terms of format, we would do this sometimes in person, But we've also done it virtually, where the company has an auditorium, and actually all the disruptors, including the coaches, we're just dialing in. We're projected on a big screen. HP had a great auditorium in Barcelona, and we've did it virtually a couple of times. So both formats are possible, kind of depends a little bit on the budgets and travel costs. I would recommend that the initial kickoff workshop should be in person, but a disruption workshop can be done virtually, especially because since then, you know, the group of the sprint becomes quite close, and people are working with it, you know, kind of quite closely. So by the time the relationship is already built and the things are moving, and it doesn't matter if it's in person or virtual. So I just wanted to mention we are straight on time. I am happy to continue for another 15 minutes or so. I don't know, Lars, if you're available, another 15 minutes, if you...
I can do another 15 minutes, yeah.
Perfect.
Not
so
so much more than that, but that's okay.
Okay, let's aim for 15. Now, I know that some of you have to go, so do not worry, we will record it. It's gonna be recorded. So if you need to go, and Christine, for example, if you're in the middle of the night, feel free to dial off, and we'll just give the remaining 15 minutes on the recording. So you can just watch the last 15 minutes. Otherwise, of course, you're all welcome to stay. Lars, you know, we'll go for 15 minutes more, and then we'll wrap it up here. And don't worry, you know, we can have a lot of these discussions about the weeks themselves as we are going through it, but today I just wanted to give some overview. So imagine you've now been through the disruption, you've been through the first iteration, and now you're entering into the second iteration. And as we said, this iteration is about customer validation. So actually building something that customers would want and testing that they do want it and that they do want to use it. So essentially in week 6, you're building a prototype. So here, based on what you received in the disruption workshop, you kind of pick up the pieces, you put together the ideas. You're trying to narrow down on a few of these initiatives, so maybe not all 5, but narrow down and actually build your first minimum viable product, which, you know, there is a whole, I mean, for example, if you read the book Google Sprint, they speak about what are the different ways that you can do like mock-ups and other different things. But essentially, sometimes, you know, it is a slide deck, sometimes it is a product, sometimes it's a website. Sometimes actually we've had sprint teams actually built like physical representations, or even like a mini functioning, you know, minimum viable product. So it was like, it had wires all over it, but it was actually functioning, it was working. So that's what happened in week 6. In week 7, you actually go and you test it. So you are looking for early adopters, and you are testing your minimum viable product with those early adopters. And then in week 8, you take the feedback of it, you iterate it, you improve it. And then week 9, you start consolidating all your learning and actually narrowing it down on that 1 or 2 winning ideas that you have, both, you know, if you are a core team or if you are an edge team. And then week 10 is the final week where you're actually presenting to the leadership of the organization. These were kind of the products and ideas we have worked on. This is the validation we have gotten. This is the business opportunity we are seeing. This is some initial sense of budget in terms of investing in them. These are some initial thoughts about how to implement it. And this is the amount of money we are asking for. And on many sprints, there is actually at the end, literally a moment where the leadership team hears all the presentations, and then they kind of get together, usually with you, and and you help them decide what initiatives they invest in and how much, and how actually structure those investments. And they would come back to the room, and sometimes even before the end of the week 10 itself, they will announce, you know, we will invest, you know, 200,000 into this and 100,000 into that. And many times the amount of money invested actually is higher than the cost of the sprint itself. And they kind of look into that. But it's a very important part of the follow-up. And we've now run over 20 sprints, and many of them, the initiatives, at least one of these initiatives that was invested in actually brought significant value to the organization in most cases, where, at least in the cases where they were looking for actually create ideas and create initiatives. So Lars, again, I'll pause here and just hand over to you for any insights about the second cycle, about the second week, all the way until the end of the sprint. And then I will mention a few closing words about what happens after a sprint. Go for it, Lars.
Absolutely. So I like that you call it the second cycle, because that's exactly what it is. And that surprises quite a few. Actually, I've heard some sprint participants and sponsors also saying, when we were a few weeks into the second part, they said, hey, it's like we are doing the same thing over again, but in a more cool way, kind of, because now they understand the process, we're doing it again. And that also means that now we are accelerating our learning. One thing that's very important to understand as a coach is that when we are halfway into the sprint, that doesn't mean that you have accomplished 50% of a potential in an initiative or 50% of transformation. As a matter of fact, you have accomplished probably very little in reality compared to what you accomplish after week 10. You're going to see that the Disrupt workshop that takes everything apart and attempts new ways of putting it together in more exponential ways, that is going to kind of reset how we think about our initiatives and reset what we see as important to work on. We get new ideas that are exponentially more interesting and that builds on more scalable models and technologies that makes more sense. And you find out that you will probably come up with solutions that are faster and easier to implement, because you learn a lot and you understand the process in the second part. I typically say that 70% of all learning that's acquired during a sprint happens in the second part of the sprint. But that doesn't mean you can skip the first part of the sprint, because that's where you learn. You connect the dots because you have gone through the process. And you didn't impress anyone with the disruptive presentations. Now you're starting over again. And now you start to see your teams typically getting on that exponential learning curve. And you see more exponential initiatives. So if you feel frustrated, don't worry, you're not the first frustrated coach in history, and you're not the last one. That is challenging, to make people continue to believe in the process, because they see initiatives that are linear, that are kind of based on ideas they've been working on before, as we talked about. So you need to disrupt that, and that's what's going on. And then you get on the exponential learning curve. And then with another thing that I find important to mention, because that's how I see it. We are not really 10 different building blocks in one sequence. As a matter of fact, it's more like every week is a one iteration that you need to repeat in the following weeks. What do I mean by that? Well, the research you're doing in week 1, do you think you should stop doing research after week 1? Of course not. But people do stop doing the research. But one example where it's super important to research again is when you later in the sprint then understand what you're going to build. Now we understand that we need to take a sugary drink and maybe convert it into something healthy somehow. Okay, that's what we're building. Now we need to research again, right? Because now we understand what we should be looking for. Now we can better look for inspiration, for disruption, for technologies that are relevant. The first round of research is very broad. So you need to do the research again and again and again as a sprint team. And you need to encourage the teams to do that. The same with prototyping. Don't just do that in the prototyping week. Keep doing it. And help your teams, because they typically don't know what prototyping even means and how it's done. So help them understand that a low fidelity prototype is something that takes just 2 hours to put together. And the purpose is just to test a hypothesis. Once you validate your hypothesis, you can add more to that low fidelity prototype. It can grow. And in the prototype week, you can give it, a real boost and have something more solid that you can show a potential client when you're testing your hypothesis. So see these as iterations that you keep continuing throughout the sprint. And then also you don't feel as bad about each Friday deadline and you get a new assignment next Monday and you're stressed out. That's normal. You have to be pushed a bit and coach through the process to get through it in time. But you always have a backlog of work you want to do. and you will find time to do that. Every single sprint works out, so don't worry about that. So these are some of the things I think is good for a coach to know.
Great. Thank you, Lars. And definitely, you know, while it has some similarities, the cycles are similar. I think the advantage of that is that you need to realize that when people come onto the sprint, there are many things that are quite new for them. Actually, we've had companies that even just working via Zoom and using Google Docs for collaboration and like Slack or WhatsApp for messaging. I mean, for some of them, it was actually quite a new experience. So even that itself is new. So there is so many new things that sometimes in the first 5 weeks, they're just kind of catching up. And then having a chance to re-engage in a similar process. Although I do want to mention that in the second cycle, you actually are doing slightly different things. You're not only learning about the customers, but you're actually building a prototype and you're testing it with them. And you're actually finding out different, you know, you go deeper and you also have less initiatives than in the first week. So you kind of much more zoom in onto a couple of ideas. But it's actually very helpful because by week 5, they kind of get the rhythm. They get the rhythm of Monday assignments and the Friday presentations, and they get how it is to work and all that kind of stuff. So as Lars is saying, sometimes 60–70% of the value of the sprint is actually delivered only in the second half. And we even have a validation for that because when we did the sprint with Visa, as Lars was saying, they just bought 5 weeks because they thought it's enough. But actually after week 2 or 3, they come to us and they say, we want to definitely do the second week as well. The second cycle as well. So they actually bought additional 5 weeks to have the whole 10 weeks altogether because they found so much value in the process and they wanted to stay in it longer. So that's kind of there. So this is essentially what happens mostly throughout the sprint. You'll experience the sprint yourself. You have these documents on the platforms, you can download it, and we'll zoom in now on week 1 to 5, and I'll kind of speak about that. But just to close today, I just wanted to actually look at what actually happens after the sprint. I will be honest to say that maybe this is a kind of an area of our biggest learning as a community so far. I think there are huge opportunities after the sprints, but I think our focus historically has been on the sprint itself. And I think by now we know how to run it fairly well. But there are some, there is still like a lot of opportunities for how to work with a company afterwards. That said, I would just mention a few examples. I mean, we've had companies that have taken the sprint methodology, they have taken the capability that they've developed, and they continued running sprints over and over. So, P&G and Tony Saldana is one example of that, where they had actually an internal department that kept running sprints and spinning out new ideas afterwards. So that is one thing that can happen. Another thing that can happen is that a company has hired us to create an incubator. So for example, Francisco has been building incubators before. So, the company would hire us to actually help them build an internal incubator where some of these new disruptive ideas can live. We've had companies allocating resources to the projects. However, unfortunately, sometimes it's actually different people, right? So you have some people go through the sprint and then some other people get allocated based on organizational politics and stuff. And that's something we would not recommend, because then the people who created the idea are the most committed to this idea. And if you take it away from them, give it to people who some of them don't even know what EXO is, sometimes what happens, they like kind of, revert to normal ways of working. They hire a waterfall company to support them, like an agency that actually doesn't know anything about iterative design or anything like that, and stuff like that. The other challenge that sometimes companies struggle with is to allocate enough resources. They give it to somebody and say, you work on it 10% of your time, and they're trying to create a disruptive business on somebody's 10% time. So that also does not work. Usually, these initiatives kind of fizzle out because there is not enough momentum. There is not enough momentum on that. So we have if an organization asks us what to do next, we have definitely a lot of different ideas, and we have had some good experiments and some great results achieved. But definitely, I kind of want to mention that the post-sprint, I think there is much more that we can do as a community with people. And I think if it is your client, I would definitely recommend to kind of maybe hire yourself as a thought partner afterwards and kind of maintain working with them for another few months as a coach and a mentor as they implement initiatives forward and kind of bring it to life and bring it to fruition. Great. We have a final minute. So Lars, any closing words from your side before we wrap up?
we are already now several years into the process of delivering sprints, and so the first couple of years, it was quite limited what we knew about the impact that we were delivering with the sprint. But actually these are exciting times now. I mean, I've been delivering sprints 3 years ago, for example, where we now see startups in the market that have been launched that came out of a sprint that that we delivered. And Stanley Black & Decker is one of those examples. I think we're out of time, so the story is for another time. But we see companies in the market that that were created, essentially the idea behind them were created in an ExO sprint, and that is amazing. So we actually repeatedly revisit old clients to hear how they are doing, with exciting experiences from contacting them again. They're excited about having gone through the process. They have had different sometimes unexpected outcome, but they really appreciate the journey and that transformation of mindset that comes out of it. So it's a long-term investment to do this for everybody, for you included as a coach. So good luck out there, and good luck with your program.
Perfect. Awesome, Lars. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you everyone for your attention. We've kind of dived into a little bit deeper into the sprint. We have one more call this week where we're going to look at coaching specifically on a sprint. So now that you know the context of a sprint and how it's structured and what happens, we'll go deeper into coaching on it. And then it's going to be playing basketball. So you're going to experience it for 5 weeks, and we're going to meet at the very end to help you actually start looking about how you can bring this to market, how you can present it in front of companies, what kind of resources you need, and how to make that happen. So thanks everybody. We'll upload a recording on the platform. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you so much. Great one. Bye-bye now.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.